Today, we're unpacking a massive book by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan. It's called Regime Change. Now, the authors drew on over 1,000 interviews across a 2-year period to chronicle what they describe as a radically unconstrained executive branch during the first 14 months of Donald Trump's second term. We're going to dive right into this reporting to see exactly how they map out this totally unprecedented shift in American governance. To make sense of all this journalism, we're breaking the book down into 5 main themes. First, the Imperial Presidency defined. Second, loyalty and central casting. Third, inside the information bubble. Fourth, unilateral executive actions. And finally, number 5, a post-colonial shift. So the core argument here is that this is absolutely not just your typical second term. It's a complete redesign of how the highest office in the country operates. You know, Maggie Haberman actually mentioned during the book's release that they quickly realized they weren't just covering a standard transfer of power. No, they were covering a structural transformation of the executive branch itself. It's a fundamental shift. Okay, starting with Section 1, the Imperial Presidency defined. The book's main thesis is really striking. Basically, all those guardrails that defined the first term, completely gone. In Term 1, you had military generals, moderate lawyers, people who created bureaucratic friction, right? The folks who would occasionally just say, no. But in Term 2, Haberman and Swan report that those figures are entirely out of the picture. The administration systematically purged career civil servants, and what's left is a president totally liberated from conventional constraints, operating almost entirely on personal instinct. And to really illustrate this unconstrained mindset, the authors share this wild anecdote. A golfing acquaintance of the president, a guy named Dave King, hands him a 2-page document, and this document favorably compares the president's global reach to historical dictators like Hitler, Mao, and Stalin. Basically saying the only difference was that those guys didn't have the global reach the US president does. Now, when the authors asked the president about this, he reportedly embraced the comparison enthusiastically. Just saying, sounds good to me. Moving right along to Section 2, loyalty and central casting. This really gets to the heart of how personnel decisions actually went down. It was an absolute obsession with TV aesthetics. It was literally treated like Hollywood casting. John Ratcliffe gets picked for the CIA, largely because the president thought he looked like Cary Grant.
Hegseth is tapped for defense because he's good on television, and Tulsi becomes Director of National Intelligence with the reported private rationale being, well, what harm could she really do?
But it wasn't just the people being reshaped. It was a physical environment, too. There's this incredibly vivid detail in the book where Press Secretary Carolyn Labb walks into the Oval Office, and what does she find? The president clutching a tube of superglue, literally trying to stick gold decorations onto the historic marble fireplace mantel. Haberman and Swan used this moment to show his intense focus on personal branding, literally molding independent institutions to fit his exact image. All right, Section 3, inside the information bubble. So when a massive crisis hits, you'd normally expect a standard press office response, right? Well, not here. The reporting uncovers a super unconventional, highly secretive approach to handling bad news. And a prime example of this was the fallout from the Epstein files over the summer of 2025. Get this, Haberman and Swan revealed that the Situation Room, the highly secure space normally kept strictly for global military crises, was completely repurposed. Top aides were using it. They held highly sensitive PR strategy meetings. This was about the Epstein files. And what's even more telling about its information bubble? The authors report that the president actually avoided these meetings altogether simply because he didn't want to talk about it. The book also digs into this bizarrely transactional relationship with the nation's elite. On one hand, you have public attacks on corporate monopolies, but behind the scenes, the president is maintaining direct channels with tech billionaires. He'd even show off and privately mock these fawning text messages he got from guys like Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg. And when it came to institutional friction, take Federal Reserve Chair, for instance. Instead of firing him, which would obviously send the markets into a tailspin, the president chose to harass Powell over building renovation costs. Why? Just to, in his own words, bust his balls. That brings us to Section 4, unilateral executive actions. Now, to really grasp the gravity of legal debates happening internally, we need to touch on a fundamental piece of the Constitution, habeas corpus. It's the bedrock right that protects people from unlawful detention, and historically, It's only ever been suspended in extreme cases like war or invasion. So keeping that in mind, the book reveals something huge. Early in the term, the administration was seriously debating taking the incredibly rare step of suspending habeas corpus. And the reason? Solely to accelerate the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. The authors really highlight this as proof of an unparalleled willingness to just bypass constitutional norms to push domestic policy through. And the book lays out a rapid-fire sequence of unilateral actions that bypass Congress entirely. We're talking about initiating a war with Iran, without congressional authorization, deploying National Guard troops into American streets. Oh, and slapping a massive 225% tariff on specific Chinese goods, a move that, according to the reporting, actually startled the president himself once he realized the sheer scale of what he just authorized. The siloing of information was just extreme. For example, when they were making the decision to go to war with Iran, the Treasury and Energy secretaries were purposefully kept out of the initial meetings. Think about that for a second. The exact people who would be tasked with managing the global economic fallout and the resulting energy crisis were kept totally in the dark just because the administration was terrified they might leak the information. And finally, Section 5, a post-constitutional shift. A lot of reviewers, like David Remnick from The New Yorker, really latched onto this one metaphor from the book. Basically, under this new system of personal patronage, a no-bid contract to maintain the national reflecting pool was handed over to the president's personal pool guy. The result? The water literally turned green with algae. Remnick and others use this to perfectly illustrate what happens when basic institutional functions degrade because expertise is completely swapped out for personal loyalty. You also see this massive erosion of traditional diplomatic decorum. According to the book, sitting Treasury Secretary privately advised against hosting Ukrainian president, comparing him to Mr. Bean on crack. And it gets wilder. Besant allegedly compared his own boss to Democratic megadonor George Soros, saying they're the same animal. Hearing such candid, disparaging remarks from a cabinet official really underscores the chaotic reality operating just behind the scenes. And this all builds to the author's central historical irony. For years, there were mechanisms meant to hold the executive accountable, right? Indictments, political exile, massive backlash. But ultimately, those things just emboldened him. By surviving it all, Haberman and Swan argue he returned to office entirely convinced of his own invincibility, totally willing to shatter every remaining constraint and gamble with global stability. So I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. Viewer Fintan O'Toole noted that in journalism and politics, we always assume that when bad actions are exposed, a consequence will follow. But this reporting on the Imperial Presidency forces us to ask a really difficult question. What happens when that assumption is broken? What happens to a democracy and to the survival of our institutional guardrails when an executive simply defies exposure and operates entirely beyond consequence? Thanks so much for joining me for this summary of regime change. Please comment your opinion and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.